Welcome to or welcome back to How to Change the World, the podcast that empowers social change makers with insights, tools, and inspiration to drive meaningful impact. I am your host, Catherine Alonso. Across the United States, we are facing the most severe housing affordability crisis in generations. On a single night in 2024, more than 771,000 people were experiencing homelessness, which is an 18% increase from the count in 2023, and the highest number ever recorded since the federal government began tracking the data. But the issue goes deeper than homelessness itself. Experts estimate that the country faces a shortage of more than 7 million affordable rental homes for extremely low-income households. So that means that for every 100 families who need an affordable place to live, only about 35 homes are available. And in states facing some of the most severe shortages, which includes my home state of Arizona, the gap is even wider. In Arizona, there is only one affordable home available for every 30 extremely low-income renters. When housing costs rise faster than wages and affordable homes are just not available, more families find themselves one unexpected bill, job loss, or medical emergency away from losing their housing entirely. And this is a reality being faced by people in our communities every single day. Today's guest spends every single day working on solutions to this challenge. Mike Shaw is the president and CEO of HOM Inc., a Javelina client and a company that partners with nonprofits and public agencies to help people experiencing homelessness move into permanent housing. Through these partnerships, HOM currently operates housing programs that support more than 7,000 families across Arizona and Los Angeles. Mike has spent more than 3 decades in this work, helping grow HOM from a small family business into one of the country's leading administrators of permanent housing programs. Along the way, he's developed innovative partnerships, including the Threshold Initiative, which is featured in my book, The Changemaker's Toolkit. And Threshold brings property owners into the solution by connecting them with housing voucher programs. I have had the opportunity to work with Mike and his team here in Arizona, and I featured his work in the Changemaker's Toolkit because it is a powerful example of how new collaborations between government, nonprofits, and the private sector can create real progress on one of the most complex challenges our communities face. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Mike Shaw. Mike Shaw, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I was just telling you off mic, I can't believe I haven't had you on before. We've been working together for years now, which is actually kind of crazy. And I admire your work so greatly. And so this feels overdue. So I'm very excited to be talking with you today.
Yeah, no, I'm excited and I agree. I'm glad to be here because I've enjoyed working with you at Javelina and even in our group when we were working at the forum together. So I'm excited to be here.
And you, of course, are featured in my book, The Changemaker's Toolkit. And so I'm excited to sort of delve behind and into that interview a little bit, give people kind of a look behind the curtain. So let's start off, Mike. Housing and homelessness and houselessness, which really is the thing that you are expert at, can feel like one of the most overwhelming challenges that we're facing right now. And oftentimes I think it feels like solutions are evasive and the needle is moving in the wrong direction. From where you sit, working in this every single day, I'm curious what gives you confidence that progress is actually possible, if in fact you do feel that way.
That's a great end of that question because it's hard, as you say in the book right now, to feel a lot of optimism around a lot of social issues right now. But that said, I still have a lot of hope. And I think what gives me the hope is, it's people, right? You can look at data, you can look at reports and research, and you can see the needle moving. But at the end of the day, all of that comes from the work being done by people and the people that we serve, right? Their stories of success. And so when I get an opportunity to spend time with individuals and families that we're providing our housing assistance to. And I hear the difference that housing has made in their lives. And of course, just working with my dedicated teams at HOM Inc. and Admission, that's what gives me hope is, people are dedicated to do this work and they're really seeing progress every single day. People say, is it possible to end homelessness? And I say, of course it is. We do it every day for, in my community and in the Maricopa County area, probably 200 households get housed by our organizations every single month. And so we are ending homelessness. Now we need to scale it and keep that going. So
I love that. And I love that answer in terms of, it's about the people. It's about the people you do it for. It's about the people you do it with. I think something really similar often about my work where I think, yes, it's about changing the world, quote unquote, but really it's about, on a micro level, it's about people and improving experience for people every day. And curiously, when thinking of people, I've heard you joke that you got into this through nepotism because you started working at your mom's company when you were 19, I think. But, here we are many years later and you're still doing it. So I'm curious when it stopped being nepotism and when it maybe started feeling like your calling.
Yeah, calling is such an interesting word, right? Like, do I feel called to do this work? And, I've reflected on that a little bit. And I do think it has been my calling since the get-go. The self-deprecating nepotism comment is part of my story. And I like to, give my mom all the credit in the world. She is my hero, was my hero. And having the opportunity to learn from her. And even before we started HOM Inc. in 1994, in the 80s when we were in Casper, Wyoming, and she was the director of the local housing authority there. I spent a lot of time at that housing authority office, seeing how the operations worked. And at the dinner table, we would talk about rent calculations and what a housing quality standards inspection was. And so it's kind of in the blood. And when I had an opportunity to learn it from the ground up and help to launch and create the programs and make them more efficient and effective, it did feel like I was where I needed to be. But honestly, I will say there was a period of time where I was just kind of not asleep behind the wheel, but I wasn't as engaged in the homeless services sector as I think I could have been until probably close to 2009, 2010. Where I had the opportunity to meet a national leader who was launching a campaign that I ultimately had a chance to go participate in. And that really opened my eyes because I had an opportunity to interact with people across this country that were doing the work. And I saw how unique HOM Inc. and its model and its role in the homeless services system here in Maricopa County was, and what we could bring to other communities. And so that's where I felt called, right, to spread what we do to other markets. And markets is such an ugly word, in the homeless services sector, to other communities, right, so that we could help them to end homelessness as effectively and efficiently as we do here. That's where I started to really feel like I'm where I need to be, and this is a calling. So
yeah. You're right that word calling is so interesting because it suggests that it calls you up and says, hey, you have to come here. And my experience, and it sounds like your experience, Mike, has a little bit been that you discover it and sort of you kind of find what your calling is within where you are. I heard years ago, I interviewed somebody for a podcast who was a soccer coach, and she said, my calling, if she used that word, is education, is teaching young people. And she said it happens to be soccer and it happens to be at the university level, but I feel like I could do this in lots of different ways. Yeah. And so I've heard you say, and when I interviewed you for the book, you said, what your work does is it combines two things you're passionate about: business strategy and serving vulnerable communities. And so two-part question. One, how did those things come to be connected for you? And then two, is it that those things are your calling and you could be doing that in lots of different sectors?
Yeah. I don't think, you've heard me say this. I grew up in the work, right? So I'm a practitioner at heart. And so I'm very operational in my leadership and my view of the work. And so business strategy is one thing. More important to me is business execution, right? It's getting the work done right, doing it well, and doing what we say we're going to do, right? Being good partners and being accountable and delivering. Doing that for a cause like ending homelessness and doing it for the underdog, right? Fighting for the little guy. Bringing those skill sets to a problem makes it feel much more worthy and meaningful. So I don't think I could take my passion for business processes and enabling housing program operations with technology to payroll or something. I don't know that I would be fulfilled in that same way. But yeah, I think it's a good mix because some people are interested, and I think sometimes over interested in the fact that HOM Inc. is a for-profit organization, right? Living in the world of nonprofit social services agencies. It's not as unique in the healthcare sector. There's plenty of for-profit operators of health and human services there, but in our world, it's pretty unique. And so people like to ask, is it the fact that you are a for-profit that makes you operate from more of a business mindset than others? And I don't know that that's true. It's certainly not the profit motivation. We're not getting rich off of this. Back in 94, when Sharon started the company, she had just come from a housing authority. She had a board of directors and she had an opportunity to start a new entity. And she said, I want to work for myself, right? And so she started a for-profit company. And there's days where I'm grateful and days where I wish I was a nonprofit and I could go out and fundraise and do more of the work instead of just being hired by our partner agencies. So I don't think it's the for-profit status. I think it's just that we believe these housing programs are very technical, they're complex, they're difficult to operate, and you need to do it well, you need to do it right because it's going to produce more housing outcomes faster, better, stronger, right? And so bringing those two together is my passion. And now with Admission, the software company, enabling all of that into very purpose-built technology solutions that I can bring to the field is, I say it's my love letter to the field after 30 years. I want to deploy this and get it spread so that other people can experience what we're experiencing here in Arizona and Los Angeles now.
Mm. And when we think about housing and responding to the crisis of housing shortages that we are currently facing, first of all, can you talk a little bit about how your work and your various companies respond to that crisis?
Yeah, so it's good to focus on housing. I'm glad that you brought that up, right? Because ultimately housing is the solution to homelessness. And there are certainly different ways where we can create housing opportunities in communities for people that experience homelessness. Building and developing new housing or acquiring and rehabilitating existing housing into purpose-built permanent supportive housing units and that type of thing is certainly one way. Our model is using subsidies that are provided to the participants in the program. So they say it's tenant-based and it's scattered site, meaning that they get to use those rental subsidies in the community to rent rental units from private property owners and managers who have rental units that are affordable within HUD's guidelines, that are reasonable, that are going to pass inspection. And those property owners and managers have to be willing, right, to participate in the programs. They're not required to. And so we subsidize the monthly rent. The participants contribute 30% of their adjusted monthly income as their share. And then we send the balance each month to the landlord on their behalf. And then importantly, what we do not do, but our partners do, is they wrap the participant with the appropriate supportive services that they need to stabilize in housing and achieve their goals in life. So it's a scattered site, tenant-based rental assistance program is kind of what our sweet spot is.
Sounds sexy.
Oh, it's so technical. And everybody says, do you just manage properties? Or I'm not a developer, not a property manager. We're pencil pushers, I suppose, but we send $8.5 to $9 million each month to property owners and managers across Arizona and Los Angeles on behalf of nearly 7,000 households that used to be homeless that are now stably housed in existing housing in our communities.
Yeah. Back to the people, right? Back to the human face. I mean, we can tell this story in a really technical, jargony sounding way, but ultimately we're talking about people who have a set of keys to call their own who would not have had otherwise.
Absolutely.
So, from your perspective, Mike, what do people really misunderstand about homelessness today?
Oh, the biggest one is just, again, that housing is the solution.
Mm.
It's there is more visible homelessness that we all as citizens in our communities experience every single day. And some of that more visible street level chronic homelessness that people see and experience gives people reason to believe that it's mental health, it's substance use, right? And two things can be true at the same time. Yes, those are issues for people who are experiencing homelessness. They may be a result of their homelessness experience, they may be a precursor, but in either case, that person does not have a permanent place to call home. And so I think that the misunderstanding is we should criminalize homelessness, get them out of sight, out of mind. Let's put them in, I'm going to say it, detention camps, right? I've heard some terms that are being thrown around right now called involuntary. I don't know. There's some really interesting ideas coming out of this administration for ways to get people put places so they're out of our way. So I think that's the big one, is just understanding that so many individuals, but families with dependent children, are experiencing homelessness, living in vehicles doubled up with other families in hotels and motels, in emergency shelters, in addition to the chronically homeless street living person that you may encounter, in your community. We have never had the affordability crisis that we've had in housing, and it's very, very expensive to live in community right now. I mean, we're remodeling our home right now. We were looking to see if we could move into a modest 2-bedroom apartment, and the rents are just astronomical. And so if you're a person who has a disability, and you are trying to get housed into a modest studio apartment, you're probably going to be looking around $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a month. And if you receive supplemental security income, SSI, or Social Security disability income of $967 a month, you can't afford that rent. You can afford $200 or $300, right? And so that's the big thing that people miss, is fundamentally homelessness is a housing issue. It's a housing problem.
And one of the things I've learned through work with you and Home Inc. and other housing clients is that it is a shortage. There's not enough housing, but a lot of it is, and this is what you were just explaining, is a mismatched need.
Mm.
That there's a size of housing, where it's located, the type of housing, that there are a lot of people in communities who actually would like to downsize but cannot afford to, and so are living on one floor of a two-story house or in one room of a multiple room house. And that, I think, gets, from my point of view, I think that really gets lost in the narrative. And how this is a little bit of a selfish personal plug, because the thing that we have worked together on for the last few years is essentially storytelling. How do you tell the story of the work that Home Inc. does, that Threshold does, which is really the project that is focused on in the book, and then Pad Mission that you mentioned. How has that intentional storytelling helped you, Mike, in terms of being able to promote the work that you do and then make the connections that you need to do in order to be successful?
Yeah, it's been so fun, and I've learned so much in working with you about this messaging and telling the story in a way that's going to resonate. And the target audiences piece for me is so important, right? And understanding how to explain what it is that we do and how it's going to benefit the target audience, critical, right? And so with Threshold, we had for 30 years many property owners and managers participating in the housing assistance programs, but not enough. And then certainly when the pandemic hit, and as we came out of that and the rents really escalated on us, and there wasn't the supply that we needed, and so there was very little vacancy, the rents were very, very high, and we were starting to lose owners and operators of rental housing in the community to our programs, because they had plenty of people that didn't have vouchers that were needing housing that they could continue to increase the rents for. So we needed to find a way to stop that bleeding, and we needed to get in front of them in a new way. So understanding how to present the benefits of working with us and how to engage them as meaningful stakeholders in the conversation was so important. Making them feel and not just making them feel, but really inviting them to the table as collaborators and asking them, what is it about the housing programs that could be better that would entice you to work with us more, and we surveyed them and we got specific responses that then informed how we put Threshold together and what types of financial incentives and other program operations that we could bring that would meet their needs. And we saw a huge increase in the number of opportunities that we were able to bring to our participants to live in the community. And so telling that story in a way that resonates with the audience is so important. And then how we tell the funders who are giving us money, what are the results of this work, and telling that story is a little different. Talking to the case manager and the participant in the housing program and telling that story is a little bit different. So really getting it right based on the audience is something that you've been instrumental in my learning on that. So,
well, and it's been such an absolute pleasure. This morning, getting ready, I was thinking about the first coffee we had, which I think it was 2020. I think we were just starting to get back together in person. And I was just thinking about, sometimes you go for coffee with somebody and it doesn't come to anything. And then other times you go to coffee with somebody and it becomes one of the most meaningful projects that you'll ever work on. And that's what that one was for me. So I want to ask you a little bit more about Threshold. But before we do that, let's take a quick ad break. The world can feel so overwhelming right now, and that it is impossible to make a difference. I wrote the Changemaker's Toolkit for anyone who wants to build a kinder, more equitable world, but isn't sure where to start or how to keep going. The book weaves together insights from so many incredible changemakers and offers a roadmap for driving impact in today's world. The Changemaker's Toolkit is out now, and you can buy it anywhere books are sold. Let's keep building the world as we believe it can be. Okay, so Threshold was the program that brought us together initially. You were kind of developed, it wasn't called Threshold then. I don't know what we were calling it, but it was probably a sentence long. And so we worked together on the naming, the positioning, figuring out the target audiences. But one of the things that is so impressive about Threshold is it really brings people who already own and operate property into the solution. So talk me through, Mike, what led you to rethink the role of property owners and operators in addressing our housing crisis?
Yeah, one thing that occurred to me pretty quickly, okay, going back to HOM Inc. being a for-profit, in addition to being a for-profit company, we were also a real estate licensee. So we were technically a real estate brokerage, though we didn't practice any real estate sales or property management. It just always was something that helped us understand the partners that we were working with and their business objectives and their goals, and we could speak their language, and that differentiated us a little bit. So we've always been not sympathetic, but friendly with. We've been a member of the Arizona Multi-Housing Association, the Apartment Association, and other realtor groups and that type of thing forever. So we've worked alongside them for some time in a way that's different than how most homeless services agencies view property owners and managers. And when the pandemic hit and we had the moratorium on evictions, for example, and some states were better than others at getting money deployed to property owners and managers on behalf of tenants that were in place to avoid them being evicted, they were vilified. Property owners and managers were public enemy number one for a good long time. And I always thought that was unfair. And I felt like we needed to give them an opportunity to explain to the community that they are housing providers. They want to give people homes as well. And so bringing them into the fold to be able to be part of the work to end homelessness more intentionally and not just, tangentially was so important. And it really did shift the way that the property owners and managers, especially members of the Arizona Multi-Housing Association, when the CEO of that organization, Courtney, stood up with us at the launch of Threshold and said to her members, this is something that we believe in, we support, and we encourage our members to come to the table in a new way. that was huge. And that relationship came from years of us understanding how we needed to work with our partners differently and view them differently. But Threshold really gave us the opportunity to be much more intentional about it. And it was a huge opening for both sides.
Well, and one of the choices that we made, kind of a peek behind the curtain for those listening, and I think highlights the importance of intentional storytelling, is one of the decisions that we made in developing the Threshold story was to use the language property owners and operators, not landlords.
Right.
Because landlords is this, it is a very stigmatized phrase. You know, how many Charles Dickens novels are there with like, you know, a greedy, mean landlord? Anytime your landlord is calling, it doesn't portend good things. Versus property owner and operator, which is a little bit more of a clinical, less stigmatized term. Has that been instrumental, do you think, in the telling of the Threshold story?
A little bit. I laugh because, that's like comes out of the feudal system in your neck of the woods, right? This is funny because in the human services world, the social services world, language is important. We try to say person with disabilities, a person experiencing homelessness, and we want to honor people's, personhood before their struggle or whatever. But, landlords, property owners and operators didn't want to be called landlords. So it was a little bit meeting them where they were at and honoring their request. Right. And so, it's loaded, and there's really strong feelings about that on both sides. I just think it's a better way to describe them, and understanding there's so many different kinds of landlords. Right, there's the big institutional real estate investment trusts and operators that have properties across this country. There are moms and pops landlords, right, and everything in between. And so understanding how to segment those two and how to reach them and who are the decision makers, who are the influencers. Again, such fun work that we did with you all to understand that, to reach the target audiences.
Well, and I think the lesson is intentionality behind language. And to your point, thinking about what resonates with your target audience, how your target audience feels. In this instance, our target audience for Threshold was the property owner and the operator themselves. Yeah. And so you don't want to use alienating language, even if it's many syllables shorter. Yeah. So I think it's a really great case study in the intentionality behind language choice. And sometimes it is worth putting a lot of time, energy, and resources into picking the right word to describe one thing in a sentence.
Yeah. And that's my issue, is having been so deeply ingrained in the work and having it be as technical as it is. It's hard for me to explain to someone what I do in a way that, a layperson can understand. And so, yes, being intentional about not stripping what we do of all the detail, but getting it to land with someone in a way that they understand is so important. So that's been really fun to get better at that as we go.
Well, and I think that's why a company like Javelina can be so valuable, because it's pretty difficult for you to strip yourself of like all the knowledge and the history and the institutional awareness that you have. And so we come along as our little, we know enough to be dangerous, but we're not embedded, and are able to really partner with the experts on the front lines to develop the story that's going to do the work the best justice.
Although I'll say, you guys are 4 or 5 years, maybe more, into working not just with us, but a number of efforts and initiatives around housing and homelessness. So you guys are, more than enough to be dangerous at this point.
You could say it's our biggest vertical. We've done a lot of work in housing and homelessness, and it's become one of my favorite sectors, I guess might be the right word. I think because the people, there's so much passion and drive, and it's a truly critical issue of our time, but it's fundamentally a math problem, and math problems are solvable. And it's not, I don't think it's easy or linear, and it's certainly not quick, but I can see the trajectory and that there is possibility for improvement. And then what I love about it is each of our clients that we work with are tackling one piece of the of the pie. And I think that's one of the things that I loved about Threshold is it was so specific.
Yeah.
We are recruiting property owners and operators who already have property to participate in housing voucher programs. That's a millimeter of the wider problem. But I think when you focus there as a change maker, where you can move the ball much further than if you try and eat the whole pie.
Oh, I love that. I think, I often say that I'm a specialist in the homelessness world. After 30 years, I'm a generalist as well, but I don't do outreach or diversion or eviction prevention or emergency shelter. I, do the permanent housing interventions really well. And so I specialize in that. And I believe we need to continue to look at how we do the work in the communities so that we recognize where there are unique capabilities, strengths, expertise, experience, knowledge, connections, all those types of things, and really let people do what they're best at. There needs to be an operational backbone, but at the end of the day, I think that's what differentiates us from other organizations is we don't want to develop housing. We don't want to be case managers. We don't want to be clinicians. We're not going to manage property, but we can administer these tenant-based rental assistance interventions, very, very well. And that really should take some pressure off of other parts of the system and let them specialize in the housing stabilization work, right? And keeping people stably housed and achieving their goals in life. And so bringing those complementary skill sets together, I always say, can really get to 1 + 1 = 3. So I love that.
Well, and I think that focus on what you are uniquely good at is really difficult. And one of the common problems we see in the social sector, to use the lingo, is mission creep, where it's very easy to then think, oh, well, what about if we do this thing over here? What about if we do this thing over here? Mike, have there been infrastructure or operational choices you make in running your businesses that make sure that you stay focused on the thing that you are uniquely good at?
Some of it goes back to we're not a nonprofit organization. And so every time there's a grant out there that is made available, some RFPs, typically for nonprofit organizations. And so the mission creep, the opportunity to go pursue something that's close enough to what you do, and you can make the case that it's going to advance your mission is more. It's there more for the nonprofit organizations than it is for us. For us, we are really selling our service to an organization that has to see value in what it is that we do. So we tend to we stick to our core area of expertise pretty well. Now, that being said, as we've expanded into other communities and they see what we're capable of, we're being asked to do some things that are, slightly tangential. Processing financial assistance payments can be an ongoing monthly thing for an assisted tenancy in a housing program. And it also can be a one-time payment to keep people from experiencing homelessness in the first place. But I think, we try to view all of the opportunities that come our way through the lens of, is this going to be something that leverages our core area of expertise? Is it going to advance our mission? Can we do it our way, right? Is it going to be fun? And is it going to be financially viable and sustainable? So, we can't go out and raise funds like a nonprofit to kind of fill holes in our budget. So we have to price in a way that is going to support the solid operations that we want to deliver in the contracts that we sign.
Well, I think what I hear in that answer is that strong sense of core identity and who you are and what your mission is and what it is that you do is so important. I think back to the early days of Javelina, and we didn't have that documented. I think we did. I think it existed, but we hadn't put it into words. And we certainly experienced the for-profit version of mission creep because someone would come to us and say, hey, can you help us with this thing? And we did exactly what you described, is we made an argument that, this can do, and then before long, you keep doing that and you end up with quite a disparate set of services. And we've had to work really hard to move beyond that, to evolve beyond that. So the lesson I take in your answer, and it sounds like you have maybe naturally always had this, is a really clear sense of who are we, what is our mission, how can we create value, and saying yes to that thing and that thing only.
Yeah, and it's we think our partnership model is unique. We want to again take some of the load off of the people that we are contracted with, so that they can focus on what they're good at, right? And we both have the same mission. We just think that when we work together, we're going to get a better outcomes. Yeah, we've been trying to stay in our lane, so to speak, but it's also, you don't want to let yourself off the hook, right? If you
Right.
are particularly capable of doing something and you can bring more skill sets and more services under the umbrella and move the needle in your community and make change, right? Do you have an obligation to do that? Are you called to do that? And so it's a balance. I think you need to be careful that you don't do the mission creep, but also you need to go big sometimes and not play small.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that. So I consume and have done for years a lot of business books, business podcasts, business articles, whatever. And there are two pieces of completely contradicting advice that you hear all the time, which are both true.
Yeah.
And one is know when to pivot, know when the tree you are barking up is dead and you need to go and bark up another tree. And the other piece of advice is never give up. Never
Yeah.
give up. Businesses don't fail, entrepreneurs give up. Keep
Yeah.
going, keep pushing. And those are two completely contradictory pieces of advice. And I find both are true. The key is knowing which which one to do. And you're describing the same thing. Don't mission creep. Don't be so sort of laser focused that you miss opportunities to meaningfully move the needle on the thing that you care about. And I think both are true. And so how, Mike, do you distinguish? How do you know which is the correct advice in any given scenario?
Yeah. I don't, there's no easy answer to that. And sometimes
Yeah.
as leaders, we have to take in as much information as we can, analyze it, but then make a damn decision, right? That's something that I sometimes will get paralyzed on. I will want to plan until I know like there's no risk. We can go ahead and deploy and I feel confident that we're going to be successful, but you can't take months to get there either. And especially right now, I know we'll talk about this, is the pace of change. Like you have to be ready to make a call. I don't know that I could say there's a particular thing that I look for to decide when we need to pivot, right? I just know that we're getting better at making decisions faster. We're still not as fast as I think we could be or should be. But we're learning and we're leaning into that. It's kind of the old lean startup, is get to market quick, put your minimum viable product out there quick, iterate, get the voice of your users and the customers and understand where you can improve and do that as you go. I used to be a bit more cautious in that I was always letting perfect be the enemy of good.
Mm.
And I didn't want to say yes if I didn't think I could, put forward a stellar product. And now I'm a little bit more okay with recognizing, again, from my years of experience and seeing other systems, I may not know how to do this perfectly from the get go, but I think I'm going to do it better than most. And I will figure out how to get to perfection eventually. So let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. I love what you said about making choices. I think particularly in a rapid rate of change. And when I think about the biggest mistakes I've made as a business leader, it's it's usually that, like not making a decision fast enough. And not making a decision fast enough is a decision.
Yeah.
And you're sort of making the default choice, usually the status quo, and that those are the things. So I think you've created a light bulb moment for me in that it's always been important to be decisive. I think as a leader, the rapid rate of change probably enhances that even more so.
Yeah. And if you're letting other conditions and circumstances make the decisions for you, you can get into that victim mode really easily. And that's not a good place to be,
No, no, it's not. Well, speaking of that, for people who want to tackle complex challenges like housing, homelessness, what lessons have you learned about how change actually happens and keeping out of that victim mode?
Yeah. You know, I'm going to go back to the 100,000 Homes campaign because that was my kind of seminal experience of making change, at a large level. And it started out with our participating in that campaign here in Arizona. And so the 100,000 Homes campaign was a national movement led by a group called Community Solutions that wanted to really turn the way that we were prioritizing people who were experiencing homelessness on its head, where really prior to that, housing programs and agencies were selecting people into the programs that were probably most likely to succeed. But that was leaving a lot of people who were viewed as perhaps service resistant or not ready for housing on the streets and frankly dying on the streets, right? And so the system needed to be shifted so that we were really prioritizing those that, but for long-term housing stability and case management and subsidy, were going to die on the streets. And so that was a very important moment for me personally and professionally. We were able to demonstrate some things like the housing first philosophy being deployed in a way that has the fidelity to those concepts, no barriers to entry, but also voluntary services, but still assertive engagement by the supportive services providers to do whatever it took to keep that person stably housed who had been outside for a very long time. We had such an experience locally that I was able to join that national team and start to deploy that model across the country from 2012 to 2015. And one of the things that really influenced us was the book Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. An oldie but a goodie, right? Is it how to make change when change is hard? And Dan was an advisor to our campaign. And so I learned a lot about shrinking the change, finding the bright spots, bringing people together, rallying the herd, all those concepts. That was very influential for us. And then later, we worked with an organization called the Rapid Results Institute, which was led by Nadeem Mata. And their methodology was to bring people together for 100-day kind of sprints where all the barriers were removed, right? They were empowered by leadership to think differently, act differently, and figure things out. And then importantly, how to lock those changes that you learned during those intense 100-day sprints in as systems change going forward. And so some of those concepts have really stuck with me in terms of, is this a surge moment? Do we need to go do something really hard, really fast? Is this a movement where we need to rally our community together under a particular goal that's audacious and time bound? So I think having some frameworks like yours in the book is very important. I think those are good tools to have in your tool belt as a change maker.
I love a good framework.
Yeah.
I can't get enough of a good framework. I think big ones and little ones, and there are so many. I'm definitely going to check out Switch. There are so many books I've read across the years that I just come back to over and over to have some sort of way to tackle a problem or a challenge.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing yours. And if someone's listening right now and they want to help address housing stability in their own community, where would you tell them to start?
Oh boy, there are so many organizations that are doing such great work. And so I think sometimes when somebody who wants to volunteer, for example, I'd say get connected with the people that are doing the work professionally in the community. Sometimes, especially communities of faith, they want to a place, an encampment, a park or whatever, and bring people food and clothing and those types of things. And that's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's opportunities to find the people doing that work and to support their work, right? That's important. If you're looking for a way to enter the field, I believe every homeless services professional in this country should have worked at a local housing authority. Again, my bias, right? That's where I, come from, my story. But I was at the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference in San Diego a couple of weeks ago, and I was going through the app and looking at attendees and looking at titles to try to meet with people. And I was so shocked and dismayed at how few titles had the word housing in them. Going back to, that's the solution to homelessness. So we need to continue the evolution. It is happening of the homeless services sector, realizing that it is a housing sector. We need to bring housers to the fold. We need to bring homeless services folks to know more about permanent housing interventions. And it's happening. They're becoming developers, very successful developers of housing, operators of housing programs. And then one final one, if somebody really wants to go deep, the National Low Income Housing Coalition has an advocate's guide that has like 20 chapters on every single housing program that this
Wow.
country offers and how it works and what the history was behind it, the legislation that authorized it, how the appropriations works. And it just gives you such a huge advantage. It's a difficult thing to navigate, right?
Yeah.
Experiencing homelessness. Now you're perhaps a case manager supporting an individual or a family through this maze, this patchwork of programs. I guess the punchline with all of that is you have to be willing to do the work, right? You have to become a master of your craft. And I think that, too often in our world, in the help sector, the social impact sector, we have a lot of dreamers, a lot of visionaries who are very idealistic and who can talk a really good game. And you've heard me say it, I just back to do the work, execute, right?
Yeah.
On the work, become an expert, read the regulations, like know the material inside and out so that you can be most effective in your role. We can talk till the cows come home, but we need to actually deploy solutions that work in communities for people.
Yeah, I think both are important. You need to have a dream, you need to have a vision, but
Yeah.
wishing something does not make it come true. Action toward it makes it come true. And the vision should be the fuel behind the work, not the excuse to not do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Vision is important, and the conviction, as you say, and having to be grounded in values, but the action piece of your framework for me is like, that's my sweet spot. So,
Yeah.
and I need visionaries. Not everyone is a trailblazer coming up with new ways in which to transform systems and get better results. Sometimes there are people, and I'm kind of in this, right, who want those folks to figure that out. Tell me what to do. Okay, I will take that piece and I will nail that, right? So we
Yeah.
need both.
Yeah, we completely do. And I think, when you think about what changes the world, it's action, right? Action is what changes the world if it's not stories. Stories and then action. But I think the other tools and the toolkit, vision, values, and conviction, are the thing that fuel the action, because action, without the other things, action relies on willpower and determination, both of which are finite
Mm,
and run out. And in the onslaught of challenges and problems that we face, and a lot of reasons to get disinvested or disillusioned with the work, it's the other tools I think help you keep the action going.
agreed. Yep. And you don't want to be out pursuing action that's misguided
Nope.
or not effective. Like it has to be grounded in things, and I
Yeah.
think that's right.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those resources, because I think they really help to make sure that, the answer to any question, how do I help X problem, is take action. But then you need to figure out, okay, what's the right action? Well meaning people can cause harm without really needing to. And so
Yeah.
I appreciate the resources that you've shared. So to wrap us up, Mike, we have our speed round. And
Yeah.
first of all, I want to ask you, what is a great book that has informed your change making?
I mentioned Switch. Another one I would say, and it's recent, is Greg Colburn is the author of Homelessness as a Housing Problem. Again, back to really understanding the data, and that despite there being lots of data to suggest that substance use and drugs and mental health and all these other issues, at the end of the day, it's housing. So that book is really important.
And who is one change maker that inspires you?
I have a bunch, but I have to go with a woman in Chandler who is a principal at a public school whose name is Lisa Shore, who recently was honored with the A+ Excellence Award for the school that she's the principal at. So she's my inspiration. She's my change maker that I look to most.
That's awesome. Really convenient to live in the same household as the change maker that inspires you the most.
So great.
And what is a daily habit that keeps you grounded, Mike?
I spend a lot of time in my own software. I'm a customer of my software, looking at our program's data and making sure that the software works. And so, I like to spend time in the clouds, but really, spending time doing the work, as I've said repeatedly, that's my daily habit.
And if you had to describe change making in one word, what would it be?
Execution.
I love it. We have a theme.
Yeah.
Mike, how can listeners best connect with you?
So my daughter goes to CU. So as Coach Prime says, I ain't hard to find. That being said, either the HOM Inc. or the Pad Mission website has contact information, but LinkedIn's kind of been my place to hang out because Twitter, I will never call it X, has not been doing it for me lately. So LinkedIn.
It's a different space these days. Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing all of your wisdom with us, but more importantly, for the execution that you undertake every single day. You materially change our communities and the people that you work with, and I'm incredibly grateful.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
When I ask my guests, who is the changemaker that most inspires you, I always think about who mine is. And when I was interviewed recently on my own podcast, I said my mom, and she seriously is one of them, but there's many. And Mike is definitely one of them. And what a joy it was to finally have him on the podcast and to be able to share his story with you all. And there are so many things that I admire about Mike, and chief among them is that he is so focused on moving the needle on housing and brings all of his greatest talents to that. He brings his focus on execution. He brings his passion for business standards and business operations and business technology. He brings his love of connection and people. And I think that's what authentic leadership is. I think authentic leadership is caring about an issue and bringing all of your talents to that issue and being unapologetically who you are. And I just admire him so greatly for that. And I hope that it provided inspiration for you, not only for your work, but to be your truest, unapologetic version of yourself and apply it to the issue or the issues that you care about the most. And I think when you do that, you really can't go wrong. Until next time, when I cannot wait to share another story of change with you, I hope you have a great one.